The trouble started on a crisp October morning, the kind where the air smells of damp leaves and the sun slants just right to make everything glow. I was sipping coffee on my porch watching Pixel, my mutt, chase a squirrel along the creek that runs through the easement behind my property. It's a quiet spot, my slice of rural heaven, where the only sounds are the water's murmur and the occasional hawk overhead. I'd bought the place 5 years ago, drawn to its solitude and the chance to keep bees, grow vegetables, and live simply. That piece, though, was about to crack. Karen Davis, my neighbor to the east, had been a minor irritation since I moved in. She'd complain about my compost pile's smell or the way my sunflowers leaned over the property line as if they were staging an invasion. I'd nod, adjust what I could, and keep the peace. But that morning I noticed something new, a row of metal fence posts, shiny and sharp, driven into the ground along our shared boundary, right where my path to the creek ran. The posts were spaced tight like a dare, and they cut off my access to the water I used to irrigate my garden. Worse, they sat squarely on the easement, which my deed clearly stated was shared. I grabbed my survey map from the filing cabinet, the one I'd gotten when I bought the place. It showed the easement in black and white, a 10-foot strip along the creek, legally mine to access. Karen's posts were a violation, plain and simple. I figured I'd talk to her first, keep things neighborly. I walked over, Pixel trotting beside me, and knocked on her door. She answered in a bathrobe, her platinum blonde hair in rollers, eyes narrowing like she'd been expecting trouble. "Karen, those posts by the creek," I started, holding up the survey map. "They're on the easement. My deed says I've got access there. Can we talk about moving them?" Her lips pursed. "That's my land," she snapped. "I had it surveyed. You're trespassing just standing there." I kept my tone even. "My survey says otherwise. This map from the county. Want to take a look?" She didn't. Instead, she launched into a rant about how the creek was hers because her family had lived here longer, how my bees were a nuisance, and how I didn't belong in the neighborhood. I let her talk, nodding until she ran out of steam. "Karen," I said, "I'm happy to get a professional surveyor out here to settle this, but those posts need to move." She slammed the door. Pixel whined, sensing the tension. I went home, printed a copy of the easement clause, and slid it into her mailbox with a polite note suggesting we resolve this without lawyers. I thought that'd be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I woke to find a chain-link fence stretching across the posts, complete with a padlocked gate. A neon green sign read HOA property, no trespassing. The HOA. I wasn't even sure we had one that active, but Karen was on the board and she clearly pulled strings. I called the county clerk, who confirmed the easement was mine and no HOA could override it. Armed with that, I drove to Karen, again this time with a folder of documents. My deed, the survey, the clerk's email. She didn't answer the door, but her car was there. I left the folder in her mailbox and called the sheriff's non-emergency line. Deputy Rogers, a lanky guy with a drawl, showed up an hour later. I walked him to the fence, showed him the papers. He read them slowly, squinting in the sunlight, then nodded. "Looks clear to me," he said. "This easement's yours. I'll talk to Ms. Davis." He knocked on Karen's door. She answered this time, all smiles, offering him coffee. Rogers declined, showed her the documents, and explained the easement. Her smile vanished. "That's not right," she insisted. "I'll have my lawyer look at it." Rogers tipped his hat. "You do that, ma'am, but this fence needs to come down by tomorrow or we'll have to cite you." He wished her a pleasant day and left. I thought that'd settle it. Karen would grumble, move the fence, and we'd go back to uneasy coexistence. But as I watched her glare at me from her porch, her phone already to her ear, I felt a knot in my gut. Karen wasn't the type to back down. She was planning something, and whatever it wasn't going to be pleasant. The sheriff's warning should have ended it. Karen's illegal fence was a clear violation, and Deputy Rogers had given her a deadline to remove it. But 2 weeks later, I came home from the farmer's market to a scene that turned my stomach. My wooden fence along the creek was slashed in 3 places, the posts hacked like they'd been hit with an axe. Deep tire tracks gouged the mud near the water, and one of my beehives, home to my strongest colony, lay in ruins, frames scattered like broken toys, honey seeping into the grass. The air buzzed with confused bees, their home destroyed. Worst of all, Pixel, my loyal mutt, was limping, whimpering as he hobbled toward me. I knelt and found a nailboard, a cruel trap of wood studded with rusty nails, hidden in the grass by the fence line. One had pierced Pixel's paw. My hands shook as I carried him to the truck and sped to the vet. Dr. Ellis cleaned the wound, prescribed antibiotics, and warned me to watch for infection. "He's lucky it wasn't worse," she said. I paid the $200 bill, my anger simmering. This wasn't a prank, this was war. I was done playing nice. That night I ordered 4 motion sensor cameras online, the kind that send alerts every 10 seconds until you mute them. I also called Nora Beltran, a licensed surveyor I'd found through a local contractor. Nora was a no-nonsense woman with a crew cut and a handshake like a vice. "I'll stake your property by Friday," she said. "Anyone messes with my markers, they're breaking felony laws." She quoted me $1,500, and I didn't blink. Evidence was my weapon now. Nora delivered. By Friday, fluorescent orange stakes marked every corner of my land, each topped with a laminated placard citing state laws on tampering with survey monuments. She also gave me a sealed survey report for court if it came to that. I mounted the cameras that same day, 2 on the creek side, 1 by the driveway, 1 near the beehives. They were wired to my phone, ready to catch anything that moved. At 1:13 a.m. the next night, my phone lit up with alerts. I opened the live stream and saw 2 figures in hoodies creeping along the creek. One, tall and lanky, wielded bolt cutters, snipping the wire ties on Nora's stakes. The other, shorter, with platinum blonde hair spilling from the hood, yanked the stakes and tossed them into the water. Moonlight caught the tall one's face as he turned, just enough for a clear shot. I saved the footage, heart pounding. I didn't have facial recognition software, but I didn't need it. I called Deputy Rogers at dawn. He met me at the property, coffee thermos in hand, and watched the footage on my phone. His eyes narrowed at the tall figure. "That's Chandler Hayes," he said. "Kid, been in trouble before, petty theft, drunk and disorderly. I know his face." The blonde, no introduction needed. It was Karen, her hair unmistakable even in grainy night vision. Rogers radioed for a warrant, citing criminal mischief and trespassing. By 7 a.m., Rogers and 2 deputies knocked on Chandler's door, a rundown trailer a mile away. I wasn't there, but Rogers later shared the body cam footage. Chandler answered in pajama pants, bleary-eyed, claiming he'd been asleep all night. Rogers held up a still from my camera, Chandler mid-grimace, bolt cutters gleaming. "Wanna try that again?" Rogers asked. Chandler clammed up. Karen was next. Rogers found her at home, sipping tea like nothing happened. But a search of her garage turned up Nora's stolen stakes, a stack of her laminated placards, and a half-empty can of neon orange spray paint, the same shade defacing my no trespassing signs. Karen spun a story about Chandler storing tools there without her knowledge, but Rogers wasn't buying it. "You're on camera, Ms. Davis," he said, "both of you." Both were cuffed and hauled to county jail. Karen made bond by noon, her lawyer already shouting about misunderstandings. Chandler wasn't so lucky. Rogers ran his record and found a 2021 check kiting conviction still on probation. That landed him on a no-bond hold pending a revocation hearing. I watched the patrol cars drive off, Pixel curled up beside me, his paw bandaged but healing. The cameras were still rolling, and I had a feeling I'd need them again. Karen wasn't the type to go quietly, and Chandler's arrest only raised the stakes. This was far from over. With Karen and Chandler in custody, I thought the worst was behind me. The cameras had done their job, and Deputy Rogers had the evidence to back it up. But the mess they'd created was deeper than a few cut fences and stolen stakes. It was about to unravel in ways I hadn't expected, and I was ready to dig in. My lawyer, Elliot, a wiry guy with a knack for spotting financial red flags, suggested we subpoena the HOA's records. Karen's neon green HOA property sign on her illegal gate had raised his suspicions. "HOAs don't just drop $3,500 on a whim," he said. "Let's see where the money came from." I agreed, and within days, Elliot had a court order for the HOA's financials, going back 3 years. What we found was a bombshell. The $3,500 for Karen's gate came from a cashier's check signed by Chandler Hayes, drawn from the HOA's reserve account. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Chandler, who handled the HOA's bookkeeping, had written checks totaling $46,900 for grounds improvements that never happened. Invoices for new park benches, a community fountain, and landscaping upgrades were attached to the checks, but a quick drive around the neighborhood showed no such projects. The gate was the only tangible improvement, and it was on my easement. Elliot called Detective Miriam Page, a sharp investigator from the county's white-collar crime unit. She took one look at the records and got a warrant for Chandler's home computer. What she found was a goldmine of fraud, forged receipts, fake HOA meeting minutes, and a word template for the neon green approval stamps used on the bogus invoices. Chandler had been meticulous, but not careful enough. Page also traced $12,000 of the stolen funds to Karen's personal bank account, labeled as consulting fees for projects that didn't exist. Karen had been in on it, profiting while Chandler did the dirty work. The HOA board was horrified. Most were retirees who trusted Chandler's bookkeeping because he was good with numbers. At an emergency meeting, they voted unanimously to press charges against him for embezzlement. They also issued a public apology to the neighborhood, promising an independent audit. I sat in the back, watching Karen's allies on the board squirm. They'd enabled her power trip, but now the truth was out. Chandler, still in jail on his probation hold, was facing a storm. His 2021 check kiting conviction carried a suspended sentence, and this new fraud violated his terms. Detective Page added felony embezzlement and theft charges, each carrying up to 7 years. Desperate, Chandler cut a deal. He'd testify against Karen in exchange for a reduced sentence on the new charges. His lawyer warned him that probation revocation was non-negotiable. He'd serve at least 18 months for the old case, but Chandler took the deal. He had no loyalty to Karen, not after she'd left him to rot in jail while she made bond. Karen, meanwhile, lawyered up fast. Her attorney, James Hall, charged $600 an hour and stonewalled every question, but the evidence was stacking up. My camera footage showed her pulling stakes with Chandler. The spray paint in her garage matched my defaced signs, and now her bank account was tied to the HOA's missing funds. Hall tried to spin it as Chandler acting alone, but Page wasn't buying it. She had Karen's emails to Chandler, vague but damning, discussing consulting payments and keeping things quiet. While the legal gears turned, I scored some small wins. The HOA, eager to distance itself from the scandal, agreed to pay for a new fence to replace the one Chandler and Karen had destroyed. They cut me a check for $2,000, no questions asked. Nora Beltran, my surveyor, sent me a photo of her new stakes, reinforced with steel this time, along with a note, "Let them try that again." Pixel's paw healed and he was back to chasing squirrels, though I kept him clear of the creek until the nailboards were gone. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. At the general store, folks I barely knew stopped me to share their own Karen stories, her bullying over mailbox colors, her threats to fine people for unmowed lawns. The HOA's apology had cracked her image as the neighborhood queen, and people were done bowing to her. It felt good, but I stayed focused. Chandler's testimony was coming, and Karen's trial loomed. I rebuilt my beehive frame by frame and planted new sunflowers along the creek. They'd bloom by spring, no matter what Karen tried next. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a fitting backdrop for the end of a saga that had consumed my life for nearly a year. Karen Davis and Chandler Hayes sat at the defense table, their lawyers whispering furiously as the prosecutor laid out the case. My Ring camera footage was the star witness. Karen, her platinum blonde hair glowing under moonlight, loading rebar into her SUV at 12:47 a.m., Chandler, bolt cutters in hand, grimacing as he snipped my surveyor's stakes. The timestamp matched the night the stakes vanished, and the jury leaned forward, eyes glued to the screen. Chandler's testimony sealed the deal. Facing felony embezzlement and a probation revocation, he'd taken a plea. 4 years, parole in 2, plus 18 months for his 2021 check kiting case. In exchange, he spilled everything. He described how Karen had orchestrated the land grab, promising him a slice of my creekfront property once the HOA annexed it. She picked the gate's design, approved the neon green signs, and coached him on forging HOA invoices. She said it was foolproof, Chandler mumbled, avoiding Corinne's glare. She said no one would check. The prosecutor didn't stop there. She presented the HOA's financial records, showing $46,900 siphoned by Chandler, with $12,000 funneled to Corinne as consulting fees. Detective Page's evidence, forged receipts, fake meeting minutes, and that neon green stamp template tied it all together. Corinne's lawyer, James Hall, tried to paint her as a victim of Chandler's schemes, but the jury wasn't buying it. Her emails to Chandler, vague references to keeping the board in the dark, were damning. After 3 hours of deliberation, the verdict came: guilty on all counts: felony conspiracy, theft, criminal mischief, and misdemeanor trespass. Corinne's sentencing was swift. The judge gave her 18 months in state prison, $32,000 in restitution to me for damages, and $46,900 to the HOA for the stolen funds. Her bond was revoked, and she was led away in cuffs, her face a mask of fury. A no-contact order barred her from me for 5 years post-release. Chandler, already serving his time, got off lighter on the new charges but would stay behind bars longer overall. As Corinne passed me in the courtroom, our eyes met. I gave her a small wave, not out of spite, but because it felt like closing a book. The legal win was sweet, but the real victory was what came next. With the creek access secure, I got to work on a greenhouse where Corinne's fence had once stood. I built it myself, hammering cedar frames and stretching plastic sheeting in the crisp spring air. The bees, relocated to a new hive, buzzed happily, pollinating my early tomatoes. Pixel, fully healed, romped through the grass, chasing dragonflies instead of nails. The land felt like mine again, not just on paper, but in spirit. The HOA, chastened by the scandal, started to heal. The new board, led by a retired accountant named Susan, implemented strict oversight, monthly audits, public financial reports, and a ban on neon green signs. They sent me a letter of apology, along with a $2,500 check to cover my legal fees, funded from Chandler's seized assets. Neighbors who'd once sided with Corinne began stopping by, offering zucchini from their gardens or asking about my bees. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was trying. I found closure in small moments. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I sat by the creek with a beer, watching fireflies blink over the water. The surveyor's stakes, now steel-reinforced, stood firm. Nora Beltran had texted me a thumbs up when she heard about the verdict, adding, "Told you they'd regret messing with my work." Elliot, my lawyer, called to confirm the restitution orders were in place. Corinne's prison wages would be garnished, a slow drip of justice. The greenhouse became my sanctuary. I planted heirloom tomatoes, peppers, and basil, the soil rich with compost from my rebuilt pile. The bees thrived, their honey sweeter than ever. I even started a small orchard, inspired by a sketch I doodled during the trial. Apple trees along the creek, their roots drinking from the easement Corinne had tried to steal. Pixel napped in the shade as I worked, his tail thumping against the dirt. We'd been through hell, but we'd come out stronger. The land was ours, and the future smelled like fresh earth and second chances. The dust of the trial settled, and spring arrived with a burst of green that felt like a promise. The creek sparkled under the morning sun, my bees hummed in their new hives, and Pixel bounded through the grass, his paw long-heeled. Corinne and Chandler were behind bars, their schemes reduced to court transcripts and restitution orders. My land was secure, but more than that, it was alive again. The victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. I was ready to build something new from the ashes of their chaos. The HOA, eager to make amends, sent me a formal apology letter, typed on crisp letterhead and signed by the new board. Tucked inside was a check for $4,500, drawn from Chandler's frozen bank account to repair my destroyed beehives and cover the vet bills for Pixel's injury. Susan, the board's new chair, stopped by to deliver it in person. "We failed you," she said, her voice heavy. "But we're fixing things, no more Corinne's." I nodded, accepting the check and her sincerity. The money wasn't the point, it was the acknowledgement that mattered. I used the funds to rebuild the apiary, stronger this time. I ordered 2 new hives, painted them sage green, and restocked them with a gentle Italian bee strain known for heavy honey yields. By May, the bees were thriving, their low hum a soundtrack to my mornings. I also expanded the greenhouse, adding a drip irrigation system fed by the creek I'd fought so hard to keep. Rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, and zucchini sprouted under the plastic, their leaves brushing the ceiling. The air inside smelled of warm soil and possibility, a far cry from the stench of vandalism. The neighborhood began to shift. People who'd avoided me during the dispute, afraid of Karen's wrath, started waving as they passed my property. At the general store, Mrs. Callahan, who'd once reported my sunflowers to the HOA, brought me a jar of her peach preserves. I didn't know what Karen was up to, she said, eyes downcast. You did right by standing up. I thanked her and we chatted about canning recipes. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a start. The real transformation came with the HOA's overhaul. Susan's board introduced a website with transparent budgets, posted minutes from every meeting, and invited residents to monthly open forums. They even hosted a cleanup day, where neighbors hauled away the last of Karen's neon green signs and planted wildflowers along the community entrance. I showed up with Pixel and a pair of gloves, pulling weeds beside folks I'd barely spoken to before. The mood was cautious but hopeful, like we were all learning to trust again. My biggest project was the orchard. Inspired by the apple trees I'd sketched during the trial, I ordered saplings, Granny Smith and Honeycrisp, and spent a weekend planting them along the creek. The surveyor's steel stake stood nearby, a quiet reminder of the fight. I mulched the trees with compost from my pile, the same one Karen had once called a nuisance. Pixel supervised, digging holes for no reason other than joy. As I tamped down the soil, I imagined the trees heavy with fruit in a few years, their branches shading the easement Karen had tried to steal. Elliot, my lawyer, checked in with updates on the restitution. Karen's $32,000 to me and $46,900 to the HOA would come slowly, $58 a month from her prison wages, but the state's crime victim fund had kicked in $5,000 upfront for my property damages. You won't see the full amount for years, Elliot said, but it's on record. I didn't care about the money as much as the principle. Karen's actions had consequences, and they'd follow her long after her sentence ended. One evening, as I watered the orchard, a neighbor named Leela stopped by. She was starting a community garden on a vacant lot and asked if I'd share my beekeeping knowledge. Your bees could pollinate our crops, she said, gesturing to my hives. I agreed, and soon I was consulting on their project, recommending clover and lavender to attract pollinators. The garden became a hub, drawing families and retirees alike, and I felt a quiet pride watching kids marvel at my bees. Pixel and I took long walks along the creek, the water clear and cold. The greenhouse glowed at dusk, its plastic catching the last light. The bees danced, the trees grew, and the land felt like home again. Karen's shadow was gone, replaced by roots and second chances. I'd fought for this, and now I was building on it, one seedling, one neighbor, one day at a time. A year after the trial, the creek ran high with spring rain, and my orchard saplings stretched their first true leaves toward the sun. The greenhouse hummed with life, tomatoes ripening, bees drifting in and out like tiny commuters. Pixel, his coat glossy again, patrolled the property, sniffing for squirrels. Karen and Chandler were distant memories, their sentences ticking away in separate prisons. The neighborhood had settled into a new rhythm, one without neon green signs or midnight vandalism. I thought the drama was over. Then a letter arrived, and I realized the past wasn't done with me yet. The envelope bore a return address I didn't recognize. Elaine Castor, claiming to be Karen's cousin and heir. Inside was a typed demand for a private right-of-way across my land, citing a supposed deed from Karen granting access to the creek. The document, photocopied and notarized, looked convincing at first glance, dates, signatures, legal jargon, but I'd been through too much to take it at face value. I called Elliot, my lawyer, and sent him a scan. Smells like a shakedown, he said. Let's verify it. Elliot dug into county records while I pulled my own files. The original deed, Nora Beltran's survey, and the court order affirming my easement. Within days, Elliot confirmed what I suspected. The deed was a forgery, cobbled together from public records with Karen's signature lifted from an old HOA form. Elaine had no claim, and the notary's seal traced back to a disbarred attorney in the next county. Elliot drafted a cease and desist letter, warning Elaine of legal consequences for fraud. She backed off before the court hearing, her lawyer citing a misunderstanding. I didn't buy it. Karen's fingerprints were all over the scheme, even from behind bars, but the threat fizzled. My land stayed mine. The victory felt familiar, but sweeter this time. I celebrated by planting a row of sunflowers along the creek, their seeds saved from last year's crop. They'd grow taller than ever, I told Pixel, who wagged his tail like he understood. The state's crime victim fund sent a $2,000 check, part of Karen's restitution, and I used it to buy a new beehive and a solar-powered pump for the greenhouse. Karen's prison wages, $58 a month, kept trickling in, a slow drip that wouldn't clear her $32,000 debt to me for decades. The money didn't matter as much as the symbolism. Every penny was a reminder of her defeat. Then came a surprise I didn't see coming. A letter from Chandler arrived, postmarked from the state penitentiary. Written in neat pencil, it was an apology, sincere, or so it seemed. He'd earned a paralegal certificate in prison and was studying property law of all things. "I was wrong," he wrote. "Karen used me, but I let her. I'm sorry for the damage." Enclosed was a hand-drawn map of my land, suggesting spots for a peach orchard near the creek. It was detailed, almost thoughtful, with notes on soil drainage and sunlight. I stared at it, torn. Chandler had wrecked my fence, my hives, my peace, but the map felt like an olive branch, however clumsy. I wrote back, keeping it short. "Thanks for the apology," I said. "The sunflowers are taller than ever, no promises on the peaches." I didn't trust him, not fully, but I didn't hate him either. He'd paid a price, 4 years in a cell, his reputation ruined. Maybe he was trying to rebuild like I was. I tucked the map in a drawer, not ready to use it, but not ready to throw it out. The neighborhood kept healing. The HOA's new board hosted a potluck, and I brought honey from my bees, golden and sweet. Neighbors swapped stories, not of Karen's tyranny, but of new projects, a playground, a book club. Leela from the community garden asked me to lead a beekeeping workshop, and I agreed, sketching plans for a pollinator patch on their lot. Pixel charmed the kids, rolling over for belly rubs while I talked about hive health. It felt good to contribute, to be part of something bigger than my property line. As summer loomed, I stood by the creek, watching the water catch the light. The surveyor's stakes gleamed, the orchard grew, and the greenhouse glowed at dusk. Karen's schemes had failed, Elaine's ploy had crumbled, and even Chandler's letter hinted at redemption. The land was more than secure, it was thriving. Pixel nudged my hand, ready for our evening walk. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past lift. We'd come full circle, and the future was ours to plant. The spring after Karen's conviction bloomed with possibility, as if the neighborhood itself exhaled. My orchard saplings stood tall by the creek, and the greenhouse overflowed with zucchini and peppers. Pixel darted through the grass, chasing butterflies, his paw a distant memory. The scars of Karen's schemes, cut fences, stolen stakes, HOA fraud, were fading, replaced by something new. Her old property, once a symbol of control, was about to become the heart of a quiet revolution. Sprout Tomorrow, an organic farming nonprofit, bought Karen's land at auction. Where her manicured lawn and neon green signs once stood, they envisioned a community garden, raised beds, native pollinators, a space for neighbors to grow food and connection. They reached out to me, knowing my beekeeping and gardening experience. "We want your input," their director, Mara, said over coffee. "Your bees could make this place thrive." I signed on, excited to turn Karen's legacy into something nourishing. The first volunteer day was a revelation. I arrived with Pixel and my brush cutter, ready to clear weeds. Deputy Rogers showed up in jeans, hauling a shovel, his easy grin a far cry from the tense mornings of arrests. Susan, the HOA's new chair, brought a cooler of lemonade, while Leela from the community garden rallied kids to pull invasives. New HOA members, once Karen's silent enablers, rolled up their sleeves, planting tomato starts and laughing over dirt-streaked hands. The air smelled of fresh earth and sweat, and for the first time, the neighborhood felt like a team. I consulted on the pollinator patch, recommending clover, bee balm, and lavender to draw my bees and wild pollinators. Mara sketched a layout with raised beds for vegetables and a corner for compost, mirroring my own setup. I loaned my brush cutter to clear a path for wheelchair access, and Rogers helped me haul debris to a burn pile. "Never thought I'd be gardening on Karen's lawn," he chuckled, wiping his brow. I grinned. Karma's got a green thumb. By noon, the lot was transformed. Beds took shape, stakes marked rows, and a hand-painted sign read, "Sprout Tomorrow, Grow Together." Kids planted sunflower seeds, my suggestion, a nod to the ones Karen had despised. Pixel flopped in the shade, earning pets from volunteers. Susan pulled me aside, her voice low. "This is what the HOA should have been," she said. "Thank you for pushing back." I shrugged, uncomfortable with praise, but her words landed. The garden wasn't just about crops, it was about trust, rebuilt one shovel at a time. As the day wound down, Mara gathered everyone for a quick toast with Susan's lemonade. "This land was a battleground," she said. "Now it's ours." We raised our cups, the kids giggling, Rogers clapping me on the shoulder. I looked at the tilled soil, picturing the harvest to come, tomatoes, squash, maybe even honey from my bees. Karen had used her property to divide us, now it was uniting us. I walked home with Pixel, the creek glinting under the afternoon sun. The surveyor's stake stood firm, my greenhouse glowed, and the bees hummed their steady song. The garden's first sprouts would break ground soon, and I'd be there teaching kids about pollination or sharing honey with neighbors. The transformation wasn't just Karen's land, it was the neighborhood, shedding her shadow for something alive and shared. I scratched Pixel's ears, feeling the weight of the past dissolve. This was our victory, and it tasted like earth and hope. October's golden light bathed the creek, and the Sprout Tomorrow garden, once Karen's sterile lawn, burst with life. Their harvest dinner drew a crowd, tables laden with roasted butternut squash, garlic honey carrots, and heirloom tomato bruschetta, all grown steps from my greenhouse. Neighbors laughed, kids darted through the raised beds, and Pixel soaked up attention, his tail a blur. Mara, the garden's director, gave me a nod during her toast, but I waved it off. The real win was this, a community reborn from hostility. I'd built a barn that summer, using reclaimed wood from Karen's old fence posts, permitted and sturdy. It stood by the orchard, a quiet monument to everything we'd overcome: cut fences, stolen stakes, forged deeds. Inside, I stored honey jars and tools, the space smelling of cedar and promise. The bees thrived, their hives yielding enough to share at the dinner, and the apple trees stretched taller, roots deep in the easement Karen once coveted. Closure came in the everyday. Walking Pixel along the creek, I saw sunflowers nodding in the breeze, planted by kids who'd never know Karen's name. The HOA's new transparency, open budgets, friendly potlucks kept her shadow at bay. Restitution checks arrived, small but steady, tying up the legal loose ends. I didn't need the money, the peace was enough. As the dinner wound down, I leaned against the barn, watching fireflies blink over the garden. Pixel nuzzled my hand, ready for home. We fought for this land, this life, and won. The past was just soil now, feeding something better. I smiled, stepping into the dusk, ready for whatever came next.